This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Ethan. How are you?
What were you saying wait on before I hit the button?
It's only 15 minutes after we started. We usually take an hour to talk through things, and then we get started.
Hey, we're getting pretty good, you know?
It's only taken us 3 years to get here.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
That is true. Usually we do talk about things for quite a bit.
But we've got a plan.
Yeah, hopefully it works out.
And we're going to stick to it.
And if it doesn't work, then we'll revisit the plan and make it better.
Yeah. Oh, we'll do an after-action review.
Oh, then we'll just have our conversation after the fact. All right. So keeping with our theme here is that we're going back in time, going back to some of our first episodes and what we talked about, and just revisiting those topics. Obviously, a lot has changed since then, so I think it's appropriate. So today we're going to be talking about what makes a good safety culture. And so I think, first off, I want to say this goes beyond just drills. It goes beyond just checking that compliance box. It's so much more than that. It's how people think and how they act on things on the everyday basis. That sound about right, Kelly?
Yeah, of course. But I would take it one step further. A culture is infused in everything that you do, right? It's what happens every day. It's things that you do because of the environment you're in, the leadership, the expectations. When we talk about culture outside of school safety, we talk about food, we talk about the way we dress, we talk about the way we act, the friends we have, the shared experiences, the shared responsibilities, the shared expectations of that larger group, right? So when we're talking about safety, and we've talked about this, and this is part of why we're revisiting it, is because we've talked about it a lot. But we haven't really emphasized a couple of things. And that is, if you're talking about creating a school culture, there's lots of things that you have to have in place to begin with. And it all stems from leadership, right? And the policymakers. Are they creating a policy? And we talked a little bit about this last week when we were talking about the 3 pillars. One of them is policies. Do your policies drive culture, or do they drive compliance? Do they drive adherence to things that make your job easier as a leader? And if we drive policies that drive culture, things become much more infused in everything we do. And as an example, I did not have this position. I tried to advocate for it, but they didn't see the necessity of it at the time. I believe, FEMA believes, ICS mandates it, that your safety officer should be at the decision-making table. And so they should be a cabinet level position. Your safety, that person that you have responsible for the safety of your district should be a cabinet level person, meaning they have the ear of the superintendent. They have direct contact with your school boards, that type of thing. And this is why, if you have that person sitting at the table when you're approving curriculum, you're approving calendars, you're approving anything that has to do with the normal everyday functionality of your schools at a district level, they look at everything, and we've talked about this. Everyone looks at it from a different perspective. If you're the assistant director of student services, let's say, and or the assistant superintendent, is that what I said? The assistant superintendent of student services, and you're responsible for discipline, you're responsible for special education programs and any other thing that happens, IEPs, 504s. You're thinking about whatever happens in that conversation from that perspective. This is my responsibility. This is what I have to get correct. So if something impacts that, you speak up and say, wait a second, this is outside of the IDEA Act, the individual education. I think that's it. I'm not. It has to do with people who have individualized programs and stuff. Everyone can expect the same level of education and services, right? So if you are going over all of that stuff and the director of school safety is sitting at that table, then they're going to start asking questions. They're going to start saying, and they're going to be thinking it, even if they're not talking, or even they're thinking, how does this impact my safety, the safety of the schools, my job? What do I need to do to adjust or account for that? Maybe new laws, new what have you. But so it has to start at that leadership level, and then it has to be validated, and people have to be held accountable. People have to be given we talked about this so many times, given the time to learn what their responsibilities are, what they're supposed to do. So yeah, it's part of everything that we do.
And so one of the things that I've heard you say quite a bit is it goes beyond seeing something, saying something. It's seeing something, doing something.
Do so. Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so some evidence that we've seen that supports that, I guess, in the way of, if you don't do something, what that looks like. And so let's revisit an event that happened a few years ago. This is what we also talked about, but it's interesting because it was just in the last few months that it kind of somewhat came to a resolution to some extent. So this is the event where the 6-year-old came to school and shot his teacher.
Mm-hmm.
The teacher, survived, but obviously that's a pretty dramatic event. And so, but I want to talk about kind of the stuff leading up to that. Is there was multiple times where different people reported or said, hey, this kid has a gun, or he said this or something like that, right? And then it was kind of like ignored.
Yeah.
I was re-listening to the podcast, and it was like that it was getting closer to the end of the day, and apparently the article said something about like, oh, it's near the end of the day, let's not worry about it.
It wasn't ignored. It was actively deferred. Right? So the idea was, and which has a huge impact on culture. The idea was, if I can just wait it out a little bit longer, it won't be my problem anymore.
Right, because it'd be end of the day and school.
It'd be end of the day, and we talked about that as well. So in the last podcast about this was the idea that if you don't act, that's the best solution. And the reason that the principal chose not to act is because it was getting closer to the end of the day. And we can talk about all kinds of reasons why that is not sound, right? But in the context of that incident, it actually can, and probably did in this case, increase the urgency for the student to act, because it's getting close to the end of the day and they went in there thinking, okay, I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to do that, or what have you. And now the day is almost over and he hasn't acted. So now the pressure for self-implied pressure, right, is increasing.
Mm.
And we have all of these reports throughout the day of the same kid. And sure, you know, we get the multiple reports that are actually the same report, just coming from different people at different times, right? It's the same incident. We get the reports there's always at least 2 active shooters that are reported, right? We went over that several times and the reasons why. But so you have these reports that may or may not be the same incident, okay? But you have to act on each one of them. And when we say we get, as law enforcement, we know that every incident has at least 2 shooters. That's not reality, but that's what gets reported to us. We look for 2 shooters. We never say, that never happens. We always look for 2 shooters. Why? Because it was reported. And there is a possibility that there are until we figure out that there weren't.
I mean, just in the last couple of years, we've covered events where there actually were 2.
Couple of, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but the reality is that the culture was not to act. The culture was to say something.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the when you build culture is based upon trust, that in any given hierarchy where there's a position of responsibility, that and frankly, the trust in the see something say something mantra is, if you say something, somebody's going to act on it. And you build trust by doing just that. If somebody tells you something, then you have the responsibility that you are going to act. Culture says that even if you don't have the responsibility, that defined responsibility, and somebody reports something, I'm not the principal, I'm just another teacher, right? I'm a peer. Culture says that if I hear of it, or that I will do something about it, right? I see something, I'm going to do something about it. It may be reporting. It may be saying, yeah, okay, I need to tell somebody. That might be the action. But I want to emphasize that it really is, what's the appropriate action, not just the action. You get to say, oh, I told somebody, because you've stopped short of your responsibility, which is ultimately protecting those kids. If you believe that your report is appropriate action, and that's all that needs to happen, and that it's going to take, somebody's going to take actions upon your report, then okay, I'm good with that. But if you think you need to take action now because of the urgency of what's being said, then you need to take appropriate action given the situation. It could be, I'm going to go talk to this kid while I report it to the leadership.
Mm.
But nothing erodes trust of action further than not taking action, or quicker than not taking action.
Yeah.
And if you think your staff thinks that you have a good safety culture, we hear it all the time when we're at conferences. Yeah, that we're so buttoned down, we don't. And then if you ask them the right question, they would go, well, I don't know. That's not my job. That's somebody else's job. That's not a culture of safety.
Mm.
Right. I remember one of the last conferences we were at in, I think it was at FETC, you asked somebody about the panic button. They said, our school is so small, we just yell down the hall, or something like that.
That was at a smaller school safety conference, but yes.
Yeah.
He said that they just yelled down the hall, and I'm like,
yeah, that's going through the motions. That's not a culture.
He very quickly walked away after that, so I didn't really have a chance to give any recommendations, unfortunately. But yeah. So I guess that would transition to the other event. If I'm okay, so very similar, but a little bit different, right? Because you have different things happening that correlate, that kind of stack, right? And at each one, there was kind of a failure point, I'll call it. So, right, you have Appalachia, where I think the earliest thing was, I mean, you go really far back, I guess, is like it was like a year prior that this kid was making some comments on stuff, but you know, the police can only do so much. They didn't have enough bricks, as you like to say, to like arrest him or whatever, right?
Right.
So then there's like, okay, then what was the communication like between the school and the police at the time? Were they like, hey, this kid needs to be kind of on watch or whatever you want to call it? But then you have, I think, like the next thing was the mother calling in,
No, there was a couple
or was there
of
something
other.
before that?
Yeah. There was he had asked the teacher if they had practiced active shooter drills or something about active shooter drills during his homeroom class
Okay,
or what
was that
have you.
before the mom called in or after? Do
It
you
was
remember?
before. It was
Oh,
before.
okay.
At least as I understand the
Yeah,
timeline.
that's not normal for
Yeah,
kids to
yeah.
ask that
It's
question.
not. It's not. And
It's strange.
and here we're talking about culture, right? Not
Mm,
the lapse of what was done or what wasn't done,
sure.
but it's the culture,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's the identification of the status of your safety culture. And so the idea was that, or it was reported, the teacher who said that did email somebody saying, hey, I got this weird question about active shooter drills, and sent the email to somebody. I forget who it was, but it wasn't the right person,
Yeah, it wasn't like it was
the
some.
principal or the
Yeah.
safety director, or it was just to somebody else, maybe a counselor or something like that, right? But the culture says that you report it to the right person and that they take action. If you don't get a response, if you see something or hear something or experience something that just sends the hair on the back of your neck up and going, well, that was weird, and enough that you sit down and you write an email or a text message or a phone call, make sure you're reporting it to the right person. Culture says everyone knows who that is. Culture
Mm,
says if you don't get a response, you're going to follow up.
and like follow up
Culture,
promptly, not like a couple days after.
yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody who takes it, we know how much energy it takes to get people to report things. And by the time they do, especially if you don't have the proper culture, then you need to take that seriously. Wow, somebody just reported this. Our first inclination in an organization that has a poor safety culture is that couldn't happen. That's just a kid being weird. Positive, good safety culture says, let's go talk to that kid.
So
Let's
shifting
find
from
out.
denial to deliberation.
We're going from not so that's a little bit different because that's a response to crisis,
Okay. All right.
right? But what we're trying to do is take what we know, and when we create a culture, now we're identifying things before they are crisis,
Mm,
before they become dangerous or more dangerous, before they escalate to tragedy. And when you look at culture, then we're looking at, let's go talk to that kid. Let's see what he says. Let's secure him and find out what's going on in his head. And maybe we do a search of his locker. Maybe we look at his backpack. Maybe we do all of these things. But culture says you're going to take action. You're going to make sure that the right people know and that they you're talking to and it depends on the degree what it is that you're reporting, right? If
mm.
so, now if you take that scenario and says, instead of the teacher reporting this conversation, when was the last time you had an active shooter drill, to what would happen if I brought a gun into school? So it's a whole different level of conversation, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
urgency. So even though it starts with that kind of question, one is, when have you practiced this? And the other is, what if? And so it has some different urgency. So that the correct person who might need to know that might be the school resource officer pretty quickly, right? And of course, we're saying this all in hindsight, right? Because we know what happened, we know
Hmm.
what didn't happen. So it's that kind of, that the culture dictates your actions, but it is about actions. It is about understanding responsibility. It is about protecting your community. It is about protecting the other kids. It is about identifying what is actually happening versus what may or may not happen.
So I'll move on to technology adoption as part of your safety culture. So, I mean, maybe it's easy for me to say this because I'm, part of a vendor, I guess, but
Can we take one step back, and then,
sure.
and the only reason I say that is, if let's answer the question of, how do we create culture?
Okay.
Where do we go from there, right? So when we've talked about this pretty extensively throughout the years, and there is a big difference between compliance and being able to respond correctly.
Mm,
And we talk about the drills, we talk about the tabletops, we've taught tabletop drills and having training and process improvement and all of this stuff. And as, if you understand, and I think this was maybe 2 episodes before this one, might have been last one, but when you start going through the processes of what you're supposed to do, and we're not just doing a drill where we can see how fast we can do it, or how it looks at the very end of an incident, and skip the beginning part of it. We're not engaging in the proper processes. And what I mean by that is, if you're required to do an active shooter drill annually, or maybe 2 a year, and you just do lockdown drills and said that's what we're going to do, you're missing the beginning.
mm,
Doing a lockdown with kids sitting in the classroom is super easy. When It's a whole different thing even if they're in their classroom, but they're engaged in an activity,
okay.
or if they're moving from their classroom to something, or they're at recess, or they're at passing period, or they're at lunch, or they're in a study hall. Different dynamics. If you miss that opportunity, you are missing the opportunity to build your muscle memory as a leader of students and as a responsible person and within the school safety ecosystem. It takes people to understand their responsibilities before you introduce any technology. I can't emphasize that enough. And so you have to build it. You have to understand exactly who's responsible for things. What are the roles and responsibilities of that whole process? Not just, I'm a teacher, so all I have to do is put them in a lockdown. Locks lights out of sight, right? There's much more to it than that. That's a critical piece, don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
But there's so much more to it than just that. So if you want to build a safety culture, it's understanding what you need to do as a person, as a teacher, as a assistant principal, and who's responsible for everything else, and what are you responsible for. That's what creates culture. If you start creating a good culture, then you can identify those things that we just talked about much earlier. You
Yeah.
go, that's weird. What's the worst thing that could happen? It's not happening right now. Maybe now is the time for me to act. If we are building culture, we're building trust. It's a trusted relationship that you're going to do what you're supposed to do. And that if you tell me that I'm going to act on it and I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to work through it. So that's the bridge. Now let's talk what you want to talk about.
Okay. This whole thing is about what I want to talk about. So technology adoption as part of your safety culture. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I mean, I see a lot of times where we're just buying a technology just to say that we have the technology, but we're not using it, right? Or you have it there just for emergencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the button. All right, I'll use it when I, during drills or whatever. You're
Mm-hmm.
safe. So I mean, I think this is another part of the safety culture is, utilizing the tools that you've purchased, the things that you have. I mean, there's there's so many parts of like our products that I mean, if there's the roster part of it that you can use on an everyday basis. I mean, I think there's huge value in a solution that you're using every day. And I know you can do that with Crisis Go. It's that muscle memory of, it's a
Sure.
it sounds silly, but it's like, hey, if you have an app, where's the app on your phone? There's been a couple times where they're like, oh yeah, we have this, this vendor, and it's an app, and then they would struggle to even know what the app was called, and then I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, where is it? Can you find it? Ready? I would literally go, and it would take them like a couple minutes to even find it, and they're scrolling through their phone. Oh, here it is. I'm like, okay, there's your first problem.
Right.
I'm like, I don't care at this point who you use. I want that app to be on your home screen.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need to access this like immediately,
Yeah.
And so it's just like that muscle memory stuff and, just using what you have. I think that plays a huge part in a school safety culture.
Yeah. The idea that technology makes you safe is ridiculous.
Yeah.
The the and I will.
Your dog has something to say about that.
I just got back from a week's vacation and they're a little anxious right now.
Yeah.
But the idea that technology makes you safe is silly. Can it make you safer? Yes, as long as you use it the way that it was intended to be used and or used to its fullest potential. I I just shudder every time I think that, and you understand who your vendors are and what they are doing. There is a huge difference between selling something that is simple versus something that is useful.
Mm,
And the reality is people will pay lots to be simple.
we're getting to that. That's the next part.
All right. So I'll butter that up for you, right? But the reality is a lot of the vendors don't have the full gamut of what it is that you need to be safe. And if you are buying that, do you understand? This is what culture says, I'm going to keep my kids safe. You don't have a very good culture if you don't have good adoption and understanding of technology. Right? This is one of the things that I have yet to have somebody answer this question. We often see people who refuse to, and don't get me wrong, our competitors take full advantage of this. They refuse to download an app, a free app on their phone,
Mm-hmm.
because the district isn't paying for it. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of school districts who don't buy good technology because it's not mandated
That's true.
or that it's not funded. No mandate, no funding, it doesn't get done. Here's the question that just baffles me. A significant percentage of all educators currently in our schools are young parents.
Yeah.
Where their kids are in their district. Even if their child is not sitting in their classroom, somebody else in that district is watching your kid. And do you think it's acceptable for your colleague, your peer in another school to say, you know what? I don't get $5 a month, or the school isn't paying for my phone, so I'm not going to do this. When it keeps your kid safe, right? There was an incident that we talked about it last year. I don't know that we talked about it on a podcast, but there was a private school across from a public school. It was like a
Like on the each side of the road.
yeah, what, it was across the street from
I feel like we did talk about that.
we did. It was
Yeah.
but it was for younger kids, so it was like a private elementary school or a daycare facility or what have you. Every day after school, it was across the street from a high school. The parent of the child in the private school worked at the high school, and there was a lockdown situation, active situation, and the child was old enough to really cross the street on them by themselves and head over to the school to meet up with, I think it was the mother. The child was released from the private school into a lockdown situation, right? So your child is not there. If both schools had the alert or the ability to notify each other, and you could look at your app, that kid would have stayed at the private school until there was an all clear at the high school. Or the parent said, hey, we're done. I'm coming over to pick up my child right now, right? So it makes zero sense to me that we are having these conversations about not putting something on your phone, and people are saying, oh, I just want to do this. Well, that makes no sense. Panic buttons are designed for response. If the company that you are talking with, it is all they're doing is providing you a panic button and a few people with communication. I just don't understand why that's acceptable. And people can't. Nobody's been able to explain that to me that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It just, that's not a safety culture.
That's a lazy culture.
Or a me culture. I'm not doing it because nobody's paying me to put it on my phone. You're missing the point of this whole thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like, the amount of battery, the extra battery life it takes out of your phone is so minimal. It's almost not even measurable. It's like,
especially nowadays. And that's the other thing is,
and then it's the data, they're using it to privacy or something like that. It's like, okay, that's not
but the idea is culture. Culture would tell you, yes, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Culture is, I'm going to know how to use it. And I will tell you that our product is simple to use.
It really is.
As soon as you understand how it works, it's very simple to use. But when a vendor comes in, a competitor comes in and says, look, all you have to do is press this button and help will come, literally one of their taglines. If that is your mentality, it's going to be chaos when that happens. Things are not going to happen when they should have happened, right? We see this in the Appalachia incident. And we see that there was a huge, this worked very, very well for us. It didn't work well for you because you didn't have the right tool at the right time. You didn't have the right tool, plain and simple. Yeah. You had a response tool. While you're trying to actively prevent it, you had no tool to communicate with the entire student or school that, hey, we have this active incident going on. We need to do something. You didn't have that ability. And you're sitting there with a company that says, press the button, help will come. You want help to come before that first shot is fired. We want help to come when the student says, hey, when was the last time you did an active shooter drill? Because I think there was more to that conversation, if I remember correctly. Because I think the student actually asked, are you ready? And, well, it's been a while. We'll see, or something to that effect. Right? There was some more to that. And so it's one of those things that you sit back and you go, look at this, the culture's not there. And it's some of the culture, the negative culture is played upon or preyed upon by, I'll call it unethical. Is it unethical or unethical?
Unethical.
Vendors, where they're playing on, I need to make money and I'm going to make it so simple for you, and then say you're safe when you're not safe, right? We lost 4 people there and injured 9 others, I think, and they're claiming that as a victory. That's not a victory. It just plain is not. That's not a victory. Is it better than what you had before? Maybe, but it's your victory is when there was never a shot fired. Right. And we've talked about this before. We do not celebrate averted acts enough.
Yeah. It's just like, it's so hard to find on the internet. It's crazy. Like, you can't find those things. It's like, it's so toxic. Like, the internet just wants to talk about the negative stuff. So it's like the only thing you ever see. So like the day when we found that, the positive thing, I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I wish I could find these things more often. But
yep. So it's crazy, but here we are. Here we are.
Here we are. So that brings me to how financial stewardship plays into your safety culture. So we didn't really talk about this, a few years back, but I wanted to bring it up because obviously it's something that we're seeing more and more. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure all the COVID funds are like no longer a thing anymore. That's over with now, finally. And then even more so, it's, you got the whole, the schools not being funded nearly as much by the government. So their schools are getting a lot of pressure financially. So like I see it locally here in New Hampshire of, different Facebook groups of, hey, we're not, we're going to we really need to raise the taxes to support the schools and, all that. And, if you ask kind of really basic questions of like, okay, well, what's your budget look like? What are you spending money on? Like, how can I help you? And it's just, it's, it's hard to understand when you're on this side of it as a vendor and you see districts paying sometimes 5x more for something that does way less than what we do. And we would sell it to them cheaper. Like, so
Much cheaper.
Much cheaper. And it's really confusing to me, honestly, from that perspective. But yet we're still seeing it. We're still seeing districts paying way more for something that does way less. And I think it speaks to what you're saying of like, it's just simple, right?
Yeah.
But like, is having a strong safety culture always simple?
Well, it's not. That's why they're willing to pay for it, because they don't want to put in the effort, right? And effort, there's a saying that everything is much better when you earn it. It feels better when you earn it.
For sure.
But it takes effort. We live in a society where we recognize things that look simple and we call it talent, but we neglect to understand the 20 years that person spent putting in effort. Right? And you talk in the sports world. There was a question. There was a famous coach, and I forget who it was. He was doing a press conference or was sitting on a panel, answering questions. And a kid asked the question, and he said, when you're looking for a new member of your team, essentially, I forget, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the actual, do you want somebody who's has more talent or works harder? And the coach at the time says, that was, I need to commend you on that question, because he was a young kid. That is the best question I've ever been asked by adults, regardless, because people see effort and claim that it's talent. There are kids that are talented that don't put in the effort and waste it. And then there are kids who have no talent, very little talent, but they put in the effort and they become very good at what it is that they do. But it's the effort that is seen, that the end result. But we call it talent. We call it easy. And I'm going to use myself as an example here. I get asked many, many times, hey, Kelly, how do we get people in the case of emergency management and response and school safety? How do we get people to think like you think, respond like you respond, and process like you process? And the true answer to that is they have to put in the effort. I have 34 years experience in law enforcement, starting from when I worked in the jail all the way up. So I have all this experience dealing with people, behaviors, manipulation, all of these things. And then all the way up through when I became a commander some 30 years later, and have all of those different assignments that I had. And there's literally, in law enforcement, there are very few positions that I did not hold, right? And most of them were in specialty positions, but most of my job was in specialty positions, just not like I was never on the SWAT team. I was never on the bomb team. I was never on the negotiating team. But I had all of these other experiences that I put in effort for. And I come to the end of where I am today, and people are asking, well, how do we get them to do that? Yeah. If you want to think like me, you got to start out at the police academy.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to go through my life experience. You have to go through the efforts and the things that I've put into it. And we don't want to do that. We want to make it simple. And part of that, the problem is exacerbated in the school setting because the probability of something happening is pretty slim. Right. But we sit back and we look at having the stewardship. I will tell you, I don't care how much money you're spending. If you put the money towards front end effort, you will save money on the back end.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? There are lawsuits that are like, I mean, they're not even astronomical by today's means. They're in the 50, 60, 70 million dollar range pretty routinely. We had one that was dismissed, but it was 27 billion with a B, right? And there are some that are still being litigated, and it goes to the amount of effort that you put in. If you put in a fair amount of effort, whatever that costs you, it'll pay in the end, because especially if you're documenting and you're constantly improving and you're partnering with the right partners, you've created this whole systems of checks and balances. Mandates, I guess that's the other question that kills me is why do we need mandates?
Yeah.
Why? I'm not going to do it unless I'm being forced to do it. That's a silly response.
That's like the other thing that gets me. It's like this isn't always the case, but like, and I'm just gonna say I hate when vendors do this, but it's like part of mandates is like there's a whole thing with that of like the mandate is written in such a way that it only benefits like one vendor, and that's why the mandate gets pushed. I absolutely hate that. I think it's very monopolistic and not
But it's
capitalism. So I
well,
hate that.
But it is capitalism. how much money can I make, right? And
Yeah. It's a monopoly, but that's fine.
but yeah, but that's part of capitalism. If we could try as capitalists, if you try to monopolize the market, you're doing a pretty good job.
Uh,
But the issue is the predatory nature of that, right? And
yeah,
mandates.
it's not like, hey, how do we help schools be safer? It's how do I fill my pockets?
Yeah.
And that's like
But
that's never been any part of our discussions whatsoever. It's
never.
never.
Yeah. The other side of that is if you are looking to solve your problem, and we look at mandates, mandates rarely solve the problem.
They solve a
They
problem.
they they solve a very specific problem that occurred in this event. And this has always been my issue with the industry as a whole, and why I advocate for many things that we are doing is most of our industry was created by somebody asking a single question or seeing a single problem and saying, if I did this, we could solve that problem. And it's one factor of the whole process. Panic buttons are a perfect example of that, and they solve one problem. If you need to get help as quickly as possible because you haven't done anything else, it solves that problem. And you know this as well as anybody. I push back on developing panic buttons because that's not what we should be. We should be working towards how do we prevent this from happening, understanding that if it fails, then we need to be able to press a button. But you if you think that all you have to do is press a button, you are creating a false sense of security. People who understand the processes, people who are actively engaged in protecting their kids and protecting protecting and creating school culture are holding people accountable. They're locking doors and they're becoming more resilient.
Mm.
Right. And, I just mentioned a book that I'm reading, and I'm not going to mention it right now. But part of it is that this whole not doing something because it creates more trauma than it's worth, based upon the probability of something actually happening. We're not going to do realistic stuff because it creates too much trauma. There's no evidence. And in fact, there's some evidence to the contrary that it causes trauma. If you are, I mean, I before I joined law enforcement, I wasn't this super well adjusted, I have everything going right. But I took the training. I went through the training. We did stress inoculation. We trained under stressful situations. I didn't get more stressed by it.
Mm.
I became better able to cope with it, right? And I go back to when I was getting hired at the school district, and they said, we have this very, very serious situation. We have all of these gang issues that are going on, and we need you. This was part of my interview, and they start to tell me what it is. And they're like, oh, we have this gang issue, and we have these two gangs at a high school that are squaring off, and there's all this stuff happening, and we just need you to tell me how you would resolve it. And I said, okay, what's the evidence that you have a gang issue? And they said, well, there's a lot of graffiti. I said, I thought you said it was serious. Well, they're doing this graffiti. I said, you're not even at a level of concern yet.
You're not even
For
scratching the
me,
surface.
right? You're barely scratching the surface of anything, much less serious. Sure, if we don't do anything and allow it to escalate, then it becomes an issue. But if you're seeing gang names that are crossed out on the bathroom wall, where you're indicating you have a problem, but it's not a serious problem. Not yet. Not until you start seeing action, right? And so, but that's because I've dealt with that stuff before. I see it all over the community. I worked in gangs for a while. It's because I trained, I have experience there. And I didn't stress about it because it wasn't a big deal. But here we are stressing. And, if we have the proper perspective, then we have the experience to keep treating it as such. And I will tell you that stress, anxiety, and victimhood can be contagious.
Hmm.
And oftentimes our kids are very, very resilient, but they take on the persona of the people they trust to lead them. We see it in war too. We have these very capable, very resilient soldiers, but their leadership is not. And they get stressed because the leader is stressed. The person who's taking care of them is stressed and doesn't know what to do. So in some cases, and I'm not an expert here, but in some cases, I would say that your actions during drills or saying that you're going to be traumatized so you don't have to do the drill if you don't want to is causing more trauma, potentially. But
It definitely could.
yeah. Yeah. So it's one of those things that you have to look at how do we create an environment, a culture where we are actively engaged in safety all of the time, actively engaged in it. Because, we talk about who's responsible for safety. You are.
Yep.
It extends a little bit further in the teaching world because your safety is your responsibility, but so is the safety of those kids. So you have both. So creating culture helps us prevent it, helps us identify early and act early before it's ever a necessity. And I would look at taking the mandates, even if they're not a mandate in your area. I would look at it and say, is this coming? And is it appropriate for me to implement in my school prior to any official legal mandate? And start working through it. And we've said this before, funding, if somebody's giving you money, that's great. But you're going to be responsible for the aftermath, regardless of whether or not you get funding from the federal government or not. And having politics play in this is absolutely a travesty.
Yep.
Right? We're not going to do this because this political climate. It's safety. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. If they need funding, designate the funding, identify the funding, designate it as for safety, and forget about the rest. Right? And I'll give you an example of what's going on right now. Federal funding has a citizenship mandate in there. Right? You have to cooperate with ICE and so forth. That's wrong to put in there for safety. But it's equally wrong for those who are inclined not to do that, to deny or refuse to participate in that funding because of that political reason. So it's wrong to put it in there, and it's wrong not to go after it. So you can't, neither one of you guys are victorious. It's hurting our children. Stop.
Yeah.
We can deal with those political issues in another venue, not here. All right.
Alrighty. I'm going to stop it right there. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.